The crisis ends, the headlines fade, life slowly returns to normal, and then something strange happens. No one is held responsible. The promises of investigations, consequences, and accountability quietly dissolve. It's not loud, it's not dramatic, it just disappears. And that silence should bother us, because again and again, after the biggest failures, the biggest disasters, the biggest moments of public anger, accountability seems to vanish at the exact moment people expect it most. It leaves behind a question that almost never gets answered. Is this a coincidence? Or is this how the system is designed to work? At the beginning of every crisis, accountability feels inevitable. Leaders speak with certainty. Institutions promise transparency. Committees are formed. Investigations are announced. The language is strong, reassuring, final. It feels like this time will be different, like the truth will come out, like someone will finally answer for what happened, and for a brief moment, public attention is focused, intense, unforgiving. But crises don't last forever, and, as the emergency fades, something shifts. Urgency becomes complexity. Certainty becomes caution. The questions don't disappear overnight. They're slowly buried under procedure, delay, and distraction. Time is the most powerful tool in this process. As days turn into months, outrage loses momentum, details blur. New events take over the news cycle. What once felt unacceptable begins to feel distant, and accountability, which depends on sustained attention, starts to weaken. Investigations drag on. Reports are delayed. Findings are framed carefully. Rarely do they arrive with clarity or consequence. Instead, they arrive with language, nuance, context, explanations that make responsibility feel distributed, abstract, and hard to pin down. One reason accountability fades is because responsibility itself becomes fragmented. During a crisis, decisions are made quickly, often by many different actors across layers of authority. Emergency powers blur normal lines, rules are suspended, processes are accelerated. And afterward, when it's time to ask who decided what, the answers are rarely simple. Responsibility is spread across committees, agencies, advisors, and timelines. No single moment, no single person. The crisis becomes a fog where accountability has nowhere solid to land. There's also the way narratives change once danger passes. During the crisis, mistakes feel obvious. Outcomes feel unacceptable. But afterward, the story shifts. Decisions are reframed as reasonable given the information available at the time. Failures become unavoidable trade-offs. Harm becomes unintended consequence. And when everything is explained as complex, accountability starts to sound unfair, as if holding someone responsible would be oversimplifying a situation that was, conveniently, too complicated to judge. Another pattern appears when accountability threatens stability. Crises often expand power, budgets, and authority. They create new structures and justify extraordinary measures. Once those structures exist, real accountability becomes dangerous. Not morally dangerous, structurally dangerous, because exposing failure might mean dismantling systems that are now deeply embedded. It might mean admitting that decisions were not just imperfect, but wrong. And systems rarely volunteer to undermine their own legitimacy. Investigations themselves can become part of the problem. They create the appearance of accountability without guaranteeing its outcome. The longer an investigation lasts, the less emotional energy remains to demand consequences. Findings are released quietly, buried in technical language, shared after public attention has moved on. By the time conclusions arrive, they feel anticlimactic, disconnected from the original harm. Accountability delayed becomes accountability denied, without anyone ever having to say it out loud. What's unsettling is that this doesn't require bad intentions. No secret agreement. No single villain. Incentives do most of the work. If careers survive crises without consequences, survival becomes the norm. If institutions recover without accountability, recovery becomes success. Over time, systems learn that enduring a crisis is more important than answering for it. The goal quietly shifts from responsibility to continuity. Public exhaustion plays a role too. Crises demand emotional energy, fear, anger, attention, and people can't sustain that forever. When accountability requires prolonged focus, it competes with daily life, bills, work, new worries, fatigue sets in, and fatigue makes unresolved endings easier to accept, not because people don't care, but because caring becomes too costly to maintain. Sometimes accountability is replaced by reform, new rules, new safeguards, new promises that this won't happen again. Reform feels productive, forward-looking, but they can also act as a substitute for consequences. The system moves on without fully addressing what went wrong or who allowed it. Fixing the future becomes a way to avoid reckoning with the past, and once reforms are announced, asking for accountability can be framed as unnecessary, even disruptive. What's rarely discussed is how often accountability is treated as optional, as something desirable, but not essential, a luxury we pursue only if it doesn't interfere with stability, trust, or progress. But accountability that depends on convenience is not accountability at all, it's conditional, and conditions are easy to change once the pressure is gone, so the pattern repeats: crisis, promises, delay, diffusion, forgetting, and each time it happens, it becomes easier the next time. Expectations lower, outrage shortens. The absence of accountability becomes familiar, normal, almost expected, and that's when the system stops fearing failure altogether. The question isn't whether accountability disappears after crises. History suggests that it often does. The real question is why. Why does it feel so difficult to sustain? Why does it seem to conflict with stability, authority, and continuity? And why do systems that survive crises so often emerge stronger, even when no one answers for the damage left behind? Maybe accountability doesn't disappear because it's impossible. Maybe it disappears because it's incompatible with how modern systems protect themselves. And if that's true, then the absence of accountability isn't an accident, it's a feature, one that only becomes visible when the crisis is over. The noise has faded, and the silence settles in.